You hear about a state governor activating the National Guard. It sounds, well, pretty serious, right?
Definitely.
But what does that really mean? Like on the ground, legally? What powers are actually involved, and when can they even do that?
Yeah, that's exactly what we're digging into today. We're looking at a specific case right here in Missouri.
This involves Governor Mike Kehoe, his decision back on June 12, 2025.
That's the one. He signed Executive Order 2525. And that did two big things. Declared a state of emergency and activated the Missouri National Guard.
And this was just ahead of some planned protests, specifically around immigration enforcement.
Right. So to really get into this, we've pulled together, a bunch of different sources.
I've got the official statements from the governor's office, the actual text of that executive order.
Plus analysis from groups like the ACLU of Missouri, who definitely see it differently.
And the legal background, too, that's crucial. Missouri's emergency laws, RSMo, Chapter 44.
Yep. And info on the Guard's role, past disaster data for context, and importantly, what people were actually saying online about it.
So our goal here really is to cut through all the noise, pull out the key insights from all these materials.
And help you understand the different angles, the legal stuff, and, why this whole situation actually matters, getting to the core of it.
Okay, let's start with the governor's action itself. June 12th, Executive Order 2525. What did it do specifically?
So, like we said, two main things. One, a formal statewide state of emergency declaration.
Okay.
And two, it gave the green light to the Adjutant General to activate the Missouri National Guard, put them on state active duty.
In the official reason, what do they say?
The governor's office and the order itself framed it as a precautionary measure.
Precautionary.
Yeah. They directly linked it to seeing civil unrest across the country recently and specifically mentioned expected immigration enforcement protests in cities like Kansas City, Springfield, St. Louis.
Governor Kehoe had some specific quotes too, right? About protecting rights, but also preventing violence.
He did. He's quoted saying they respect and will defend the right to peacefully protest, but, and this is the key part, we will not tolerate violence or lawlessness.
So positioning it as proactive.
Exactly. He called it a proactive approach to help local law enforcement protect people and property. He even contrasted it with states that, in his view, might wait for chaos to ensue.
Our sources also mention a unified command being set up beforehand.
That's right. Involved the Department of Public Safety, the State Highway Patrol, and the Guard. Basically getting everyone coordinated to monitor things and be ready to step in if locals needed help.
And this wasn't indefinite. The order had an end date.
Correct. It was set to expire June 30th, 2025, unless, he decided to extend it or end it sooner.
Okay, so that's the official side. But this is where things start getting, let's say, complicated. The reaction wasn't exactly universal praise.
Not at all. And the ACLU of Missouri offered a very, very different take almost immediately.
What was their main point?
Well, they put out a statement on June 13th, basically calling the activation an unnecessary provocation. Their argument was that it seemed designed to thwart public dissent.
Provocation, not precaution.
Right. And crucially, they said the governor hadn't provided no evidence of riots or violence actually happening or being imminent in Missouri to justify activating the Guard.
They tied it back to fundamental rights, didn't they?
Absolutely. They emphasized the First Amendment, the right to protest, peaceful assembly, calling it core to democracy.
So they were worried this action itself could chill speech.
Yes. They urged officials to basically de-escalate, use restraint, and let people exercise their rights. They even used the phrase governmental provocation and fear-mongering. Pretty strong language.
And they pointed people to resources, too.
Their Know Your Rights info for anyone planning to protest.
This contrasts precaution versus provocation. It wasn't just between the governor and the ACLU, right? Public comments reflected this, too.
Oh, absolutely. We looked at some online discussions, like on Reddit, mentioned in our sources. Skepticism was definitely a major theme.
So
People questioned the whole idea of a precautionary state of emergency. You saw terms like backass words or fear-mongering or calling it a preemptive strike, just disbelief that you'd declare an emergency for something that might happen.
And didn't the state's history with natural disasters come up?
A lot. Missouri deals with tornadoes, floods, you name it, all the time. People were asking why activate the Guard for potential protests when there might be actual tornado cleanup needed right now. It raised questions about, priorities.
That makes sense. Were there other concerns in those public comments?
Yeah, some deeper worries, like could this move actually create trouble? Some suggested it was meant to provoke violence, to justify harsher measures later, or maybe create an emergency just to restrict rights. Real concern about overreach.
Politics inevitably came up too, I assume.
Of course. Some comments suggested the governor was maybe trying to align with national law and order themes, maybe ride the wave that Trump has stirred up, or show off for dear leader Daddy Trump, as one user put it, trying to link it to broader political currents.
Interesting. Anything else stand out from the public reaction?
One thing I thought was insightful was this discussion about the Guard members themselves, people pointing out their community members, friends, family, neighbors of potential protesters. It adds this human complexity, you know?
Yeah, that's a really important point.
There were also comments about the cost, calling it a waste of money, and even some personal jabs, like one user questioning the governor's education level in relation to the decision.
So mostly critical or skeptical public comment.
And mostly, but not entirely. Our sources did capture one contrasting comment worth noting. Someone said, better the governor control them than be on Title X orders under the president.
Ah, okay, so that's a different angle. Preferring state control over federal control, even if questioning the initial activation.
Exactly. It brings in that whole other layer of state versus federal authority when it comes to the National Guard.
Which seems like a perfect transition to the legal framework. How can a Missouri governor do this? What do the laws actually say?
Okay, so we need to look at Missouri Revised Statutes, Chapter 44. That's the key legislation.
And Section 44.100 is the important one here.
That's the one outlining the governor's emergency powers. And this is where that tension we talked about, precaution versus actual event, gets really interesting legally.
How so?
Because the statute includes specific language. It says the governor needs to find that a natural or man-made disaster of major proportions has actually occurred within this state before declaring an emergency.
It actually occurred. That seems pretty clear.
It does. And yet the governor's action was explicitly precautionary, based on anticipated events.
So what powers does this statute grant once an emergency is declared?
They're broad. Really broad. The sources list things like directing all state and local law enforcement, enforcing emergency plans, and even seizing private property needed for the emergency response. Things like transportation, communication systems, fuel, buildings.
Whoa, seizing property.
Yeah, though the law says the owner is entitled to damages later, but still a significant power.
What else?
The governor can also control essential goods and services, potentially through rationing or price controls. They can waive state rules or licensing requirements if they get in the way of the response. And they can authorize out-of-state police or emergency workers to operate in Missouri. It's a powerful toolkit, clearly meant for major disasters.
So back to that key phrase, actually occurred. How does a precautionary activation fit with that language?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's central to the whole debate reflected in our sources.
It seems like the core of the ACLU's argument.
Precisely. When they say the governor offered no evidence of riots or violence, they're essentially arguing that the condition of a disaster having actually occurred wasn't met.
So it boils down to interpretation. The governor's office interpreting man-made disaster, or actually occurred, to include the imminent risk based on intelligence or planned events.
While critics are saying, no, the statute means something concrete has to have happened already, like a tornado strike or a large-scale riot underway, not just the potential for one.
That legal distinction seems critical here.
It really is. It shapes how you view the legitimacy and necessity of the action.
And how does one of these emergency declarations end in Missouri? Is it just up to the governor?
The governor can end it with another proclamation, yes, but the state legislature also has the power to terminate it by passing a resolution.
So there is a legislative check, potentially.
There is, although the initial power to declare rests solely with the executive.
How does Missouri compare to other states on that legislative oversight piece? Our sources mention some comparisons.
Yeah, it's interesting. While Missouri allows legislative termination, some other states have stricter built-in time limits that force legislative involvement.
Like where?
Sources mention Arizona, for example, where an initial order might only last 30 days, and you need the legislature for extensions beyond 120 days. Plus, you can't just redeclare for the same reason without their approval. Virginia has a 45-day limit mentioned.
So different models for balancing executive speed with legislative control.
Exactly. There's even a scorecard from the Maine Policy Institute that ranks states on this kind of oversight. It shows there's quite a bit of variation nationwide.
Okay, and let's quickly revisit the National Guard itself. You mentioned their dual mission.
Right. This is key. The Guard reports both to the president, that's federal status, Title 10, and to the state governor.
And this activation was under the governor.
Yes, state active duty, operating under state command via laws like RSMo Chapter 44. Their state mission explicitly includes responding to domestic emergencies, which historically covers both natural disasters and civil disturbances.
So that public comment about preferring governor control over Title 10 makes more sense now. It's about who's giving the orders.
Precisely. Some people might see state control, even if they question the reason for activation, as preferable to the Guard being federalized under the president for a domestic issue.
Okay, let's try to pull all these different threads together.
Yeah.
We have the governor's action based on precaution.
The ACLU's critique about lack of evidence, rights, potential provocation.
The public skepticism, the questions about priorities compared to natural disasters.
And this underlying illegal tension around the phrase actually occurred in the state's emergency law.
So why does this specific deep dive into this Missouri situation matter to you, our listener?
Well, I think it highlights a really fundamental tension, doesn't it? It's that balancing act every government faces, protecting public safety and property on one hand.
And upholding constitutional rights like free speech and assembly on the other.
Exactly. And this Missouri case, because it was anticipatory, really throws that tension into sharp relief.
So understanding the legal nuts and bolts, like what RSMo 44.100 actually says and the powers it grants, helps you know what the rules are supposed to be.
Right. It helps you understand the scope of state power in an emergency, and also the basis for the rights concerns raised by groups like the ACLU. It equips you to analyze these situations more critically.
And it makes you think about why these powers get used, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Looking at all the perspectives, the official reason, the criticisms, the public worries, helps you evaluate if the action seems justified and what its impact might be.
Definitely. And considering it alongside Missouri's constant battle with natural disasters forces a conversation about resources. Where should the Guard be? What constitutes the most pressing need? Precautionary deployment versus immediate disaster response.
Yeah. It's clear from the sources that Governor Kehoe's decision wasn't simple. It's seen very differently, depending on who you ask.
A necessary proactive step to some, an unnecessary provocation to others. It's layered with legal questions, rights concerns, and practical debates about state priorities.
So maybe the thought to leave you with, after digging into all this, is about that legal standard, given that Missouri law specifically mentions a disaster needing to have actually occurred.
What is the right threshold for a governor to use these sweeping emergency powers based only on the potential for civil unrest? How much potential is enough?
And, maybe even more fundamentally, how do states walk that incredibly fine line between preparing for the worst-case scenario while ensuring they don't accidentally clamp down on peaceful dissent, or worse, provoke the very conflict they claim to be preventing?
That's the tough question, isn't it? Something to really mull over as you think about everything we've unpacked today.